things we have learned in life and work that we need to unlearn to be a great coach. So a bit about me. I'm Claire Norman with a different haircut, as you can see. Professional certified coach, mentor coach, and coach supervisor. And in the course of my work as a mentor coach for the International Coaching Federation, I've observed and given feedback on over 570 hours of coaching conducted by over 120 coaches. So I watch their coaching in action, either live or as recordings. And it's been a privilege to support and challenge them as they sharpen their edge so that they can enable their thinkers to think even more deeply. So my definition of coaching is that it's a joint endeavour to discover new thinking that moves the thinker forward. A joint endeavour to discover new thinking that moves the thinker forward. So with that definition in mind, new thinking as our end goal, and with the ICF competencies as the benchmark, I began to notice some patterns in coaches' coaching that were not particularly useful to the thinker. So these patterns seem to be formed as a result of things we learned in our other life stages. So roles such as child, pupil, worker, partner, and even coaching training. So I started to get curious. What were people saying to us, either explicitly or implicitly, at those times in our lives that led to these habits that were not so useful for us as coaches? So people like our parents, our teachers, our peers, our managers, our culture, faith, ethnicity, and our coach trainers. So I noticed, for example, that our parents taught us it was rude to interrupt. Sound familiar? That may be true in normal conversation, but in coaching, it can be of service to interrupt their storytelling just to check whether it's useful for them to be saying out loud. I also noticed that teachers often taught us to be logical and to follow a set path to solve problems. Yet our much less logical intuition can play such a powerful part in bringing new insights to the thinker. So these scripts served us really well at those points in our lives, and we can feel compassion towards those original neural pathways that were created at the time. But it is now time to rewire the things that we've learned through life and work so that we can be extraordinary coaches. So I'd like to invite you into a little experiment. If you're able, could I ask you please to stand up? And I think I might put all of your videos on gallery view so I can see who is standing and who isn't. Not that I'm checking on you or anything, but for the purposes of the exercise, it will help me to know what's going on. So, yeah, Cheryl says I was already standing. Great, me too. It's good for the energy. So, stay standing if you hesitate to interrupt your thinker. Okay, stay standing if you use the expression, tell me more about that. Okay, stay standing if you feel that your fixer or rescuer sometimes drives the way that you coach. All right, there's some people sitting there. Stay standing if you feel awkward about introducing drawing or movement into your coaching. Okay. Stay standing if sometimes you run over time because you feel you're so close to that breakthrough moment with them. We have some people standing up again now. And stay standing if you want to add value by giving recommendations. All right, thank you. Thank you. That was a useful exercise to see who's still standing. So these are just some of the things that can get in the way of the thinker's growth. And some of it's not rocket science. We'll go back to sharing. However, using, or for example, using leading questions that come up from our fixer or value add mindsets, that's something we know not to do because it's rescuing. And yet we're not always conscious about our habits until someone else observes us coaching and points those habits out. So I plant the seed with you here about investing in mentor coaching for yourselves. So that's being observed as you coach and then discussing how you show up. And that allows you to become conscious to these habits that you may be blind to. So shining a light on your blind spots and making some small tweaks in your coaching that will make a big difference to your thinkers. So I'm writing a whole book about these small tweaks, but today let's focus on just a few of those. So let's start with things that our parents taught us that we need to unlearn to be a great coach. So first things first, our parents taught us it's rude to interrupt. We talked about that one already. However, our thinkers need us to interrupt if it enables them to move away from known thinking towards new thinking. So if they're telling a story that they already know, if they're going over old ground, if it's filling you in on the detail rather than filling themselves in, then we should be interrupting and helping them to use the time wisely and get to the crux of what it is that's going to get them to new thinking about this. So it's not rude to interrupt in coaching unless we interrupt their new thinking. Our parents also taught us to try our hardest. Yeah, okay, nothing wrong with that. But our thinkers need us to enable them to think hard. So it's actually them who should be feeling tired at the end of a session, having done some really good thinking for themselves. So rather than us feeling tired at the effort, actually it's them who should leave feeling like, yeah, I've had a good workout, a good thinking workout here. So we're enabling them to think hard. Our parents also taught us not to be selfish, and especially to the girls, to be the caregiver. But we actually know that we need to pay attention to our own self-care so that we have the capacity to work with others. So some of these are more obvious than others. And there are a lot more that have come out. So I've conducted interviews with probably about 35 to 40 coaches, as well as all the observations that I've been doing in mentor coaching. And these are just a fraction of the pieces that have come up about what our parents taught us and what we've needed to unlearn to become great coaches. So I'm going to ask you at this point to do some hard thinking for yourselves, to write down 3 phrases that you could use that you feel are congruent with who you are and how you show up as a coach. 3 phrases that enable you to interrupt their known thinking, so that you just have something in your repertoire to be able to interrupt. And I give you 2 or 3 minutes to jot down some ideas for yourselves. We won't be sharing these. These are purely for you to have something in your toolkit to be able to interrupt. Okay. So let's move on and think about things that we learned from school that we need to unlearn to be a great coach. So our schools taught us that what we start, we need to finish. We should finish what we started. Whereas our thinkers need us to help them to make any progress, breaking the stalemate that they have got themselves into. So if you think about a beaver dam, and it's got all these sticks across the river, and I tend to think of coaching like taking one stick, 2 sticks, 3 sticks out of the beaver dam so that the water can start trickling through. And as a result of the water starting to trickle through, a few more sticks or debris fall by the wayside as well, until the water comes through quicker and quicker and quicker. So our job is to simply pull out 2 or 3 of these sticks so that the water starts to trickle for them, for our thinkers. Because once it starts to trickle, anything or their thinking outside of the session will move them even further forward. So that's what we're aiming for. Some progress, not completely finishing everything that they said they wanted at the beginning of a session necessarily. I mean, yes, that's nice, but sometimes it's more powerful to enable them to just pull away 2 or 3 sticks to break that stalemate for themselves. Our schools also taught us that more is more. So, for example, I think back to Sunday school, where I used to get extra marks for our Easter project. We used to do a story, and not for me, I didn't just write the story, but I embellished it with lots and lots of pictures, and I had sheep with cotton wool and all that stuff. I really went for it. More was definitely more. But actually, our thinkers need us to stay out of the way, because less is more in coaching. So say less, do less, ask fewer questions, give more silence. Less is more. And then at school, we were also taught that we must understand things. Whereas actually, in coaching, we don't need to understand as long as they do. So when they say to us something like, does that make sense? I usually say back to them, well, does it make sense to you? Because that's what counts, whether it makes sense to them, not to us. So I'm going to ask you, in terms of the first bullet point here, again, if you wouldn't mind standing up and finding a space in the room that feels like a good place to inhabit, to visualize yourself helping your thinkers to make progress without the need to finish everything that you started. So as you stand in this place, really imagine yourself with one of your thinkers. Imagine that you're letting go of the need to get to a solution, get to an end, get to something they can do. Visualize yourself simply enabling them to make some progress. So visualize yourself pulling one stick at a time out of that beaver dam, such that the water starts to trickle and the thinking starts to develop, and they get to new ways of being, new ways of thinking as a result of that progress that you've helped them to make. All right, thank you. So now you've visualized it once, the idea is that that should become easier to do in practice when you're in the room. And if you feel like that wasn't long enough, then maybe that's something to do more of afterwards to really get it in your bones. So things we learn from work that we need to unlearn to be a great coach. Our working environment taught us to act like a service provider. I'm sure you recognize that one. And yet our thinkers need us to be a partner. And so by that, I mean, we're in this together. We are asking them to show up in a way that means that they are taking responsibility for their own thinking. Our responsibility is to hold the process, not to do the thinking, not to do the actions. We know that in theory, but in practice, sometimes I see the service provider creeping in. The idea of I've got to add value somehow, rather than recognizing that the value is added when you are in partnership together. Our working environment also taught us to come with solutions and not questions. How many times have you heard a boss saying that? But in coaching, it's okay to not know. It's absolutely okay to not know. And in fact, we need to get rid of the knowing in coaching so that our questions do not become leading, do not try to lead our thinker to a solution. So be okay with not knowing. We've also been taught to work at pace in many working environments. Let's just get this done. Whereas actually in coaching, we need to get to what matters most at pace, but then slow down to explore. And what I mean by that, getting to what matters most, is to contract well at the beginning of each session so that we both know what it is that we're working on or working towards, but then get into an exploratory space where we can really help them to understand what's going on underneath the surface, what's going on for them, how do they feel about this. So oftentimes I see coaches asking action-orientated questions really early in a coaching conversation, whereas actually if we allowed ourselves to explore, the actions that we come up with would be much more transformational. So I'm going to ask you at this point, if you were a partner with your thinker rather than a service provider, how would you be different? How would you be showing up differently as a partner? And again, I'll give you a couple of minutes to think about that for yourselves. How would you show up as a partner? Okay, and perhaps I'll ask you this time to type some ideas into the text chat. If you were a partner, how would you be showing up differently compared to you as a service provider? Let's see what ideas you've got. And by the way, I'm seeing some of your questions coming through. Thank you. We will stop the questions at some point. So we've got from Audrey, exploring different perspectives. Thank you. Walking alongside the thinker rather than in front of them. Thank you. I think you've heard that from Claire Pedrick, perhaps. Not being constrained by corporate requirements to get results or add value. Yeah, absolutely. You will be adding value anyway without jumping to the end result. Be real and human. Yeah. Gosh, there's so many coming in. I can't capture everything. Be interested in them, not the issue. Yes, absolutely. Feeling comfortable to go with the flow. Your thinker's agenda, not yours. Absolutely. Yeah. And again, I hear us talking about that, but sometimes I see the coach's agenda front and center when I'm watching coaches. Yeah, great. Thank you. So some wonderful ideas coming through there. Lovely. So let's move on and look at things that we learned from coach training that we need to unlearn to be a great coach. Now, you might be thinking, oh, that's a bit strange. Hang on a minute. Our coach training should have been teaching us everything we need to know. But there are some things that I'm noticing that our coach training, in some instances, is teaching us that's not so useful to our thinkers. So, for example, our coach training has taught us to sit and talk. So side by side, or in the case of Zoom, face to face, but sitting and talking. Whereas our thinkers actually need us to use all of their senses in order to access new learning. So what does their heart say? What if they were to draw it? What about if we used buttons as a constellation of the system, so that they could see it out there in front of them? That's what our thinkers need us to tap into, all those different senses. Our coach training also taught us, in some instances, to use the expression, tell me more about that. Now, you might think, well, that's encouraging them to say, to open up. But the problem is that it gets them to fill you in on the story. It gets them back into storytelling, old thinking, rather than new thinking. So better to ask something like, what does that mean to you? Or what's important to you about that? Or even say more about that rather than tell me more. But the idea is to get to new thinking rather than going into storytelling, which may or may not be useful to them. If they've told that story before, it's not new thinking. And then our coach training has also taught us to get to a conclusion in the session. So make sure that there is action at the end of a session, things they're going to take away to do. Whereas actually our role is to witness their unfolding without needing an end result. There may still be things that they're going to take away and do, but let's take this pressure off to come up with a to-do or a list or a plan, because actually there's so much more power in witnessing them unfolding as a human being and understanding themselves better. That is likely to lead to more transformational changes for them than moving straight to the actions that we talked about earlier. So I'm going to ask you at this point then, in reference to our first of these bullet points, using all of your senses to access new learning, I'm going to ask you to get up and walk around your room and notice the smells, the sights, the sounds, the tastes, the sensations. Just notice them with this question in mind. What can you learn from them about habits? Okay. Up you get, walk around. Notice what you notice. So yes, what did you notice as you walked around the room there? If you want to type into the text chat again, what came to you as you noticed the smells, the sights, the sounds, the tastes, the sensations? And what can you learn from those about habits? Neil smelt the burnt toast. Rhiannon, I need to declutter, yeah. Anthony noticed the bird song and the coffee. And the sounds of the traffic. I'm guessing you could hear the sound of a drill in my house earlier on. Easy to see the same old things, says Peter. Yeah, yeah. Mel sees colour, how colour creates positivity. Yeah, we're missing a bit of that at the moment. I think we're in a grey phase. And colour is so useful to us right now to spark something new. Seeing the details, says Julie. Yeah. So you can see how asking people to stand up and move around and notice things, use different senses. I mean, probably use one sense at a time, rather than, in this case, I gave you that option. But asking them, what does that tell them about the question that they are pondering? I've also been asking people to look out of the window quite a bit recently and see what they see out of the window that helps them with their question. Yeah. Yeah. Beautiful. Thank you all for trying all of these experiments out. Thank you for being willing to go there. So here are all of the things that we talked about today in one place. As I say, this is not an exhaustive list. These are a fraction of the things that I have been noticing in the mentor coaching and also in the interviews that I've conducted. But I'm going to stop here and see what questions have come up. So Jess, I think you've been taking a look at the text chat, so you might have to scroll back because I think some questions came up a bit earlier on. But if any of you have got questions that you would like to put in the text chat, we probably will go with text chat because with 65 of you, it's, you know, we could end up getting over talking and things. So if you've got questions, let's get them in the text chat and Jess can read those out to me. So Jess, what's coming up?
What is the difference between coach, mentor and coach supervision?
Oh, yeah, good question. So supervision is when you self-report. So you bring a case into the room. It's something that happened a week ago, let's say, you talk about it. Whereas coach mentoring, you are right there in the room, actually coaching and being observed, either live or as a recording. So your coaching is being observed. So there is absolutely nowhere to hide because you know you're working with somebody who is helping to shine a light on those blind spots that you have, for example. And that doesn't come up in the same way in supervision because we only bring what we know to supervision. Yeah, that's the key difference. Thank you.
We've also got our thinkers are driven by performance and that can get in the way of their own progress. Any tips?
Yeah. What a great observation. And they're driven by performance because their parents have taught them to try their hardest. Their schools have taught them to finish what they've started. Their working environment has told them to come with solutions, not questions, and to work at pace. So yes, they've been brought up in the same kind of environment as us, which has got them into this performance mentality. I've got to get to a solution. And what I notice is that when we ask questions like, what do you notice when you're saying this out loud? Or what's going on for you you know, I noticed you scrunched up your face. I'm wondering what that's all about. Or I'm feeling a real tension in my chest and I'm wondering if that brings anything to you. So when we ask those kinds of questions, we can get them out of this performance place and more into awareness and who am I and what's going on for me, in order that they can, you know, it's going slower to go faster later. So, you know, that's really what we're trying to get to, is going slower, exploring, understanding, noticing, in order to be able to get to better results, better performance further down the line. And that may still happen in that session, because they'll have an aha moment that's based on something more real rather than imagined. Yeah, great question, thank you.
We've then got, is there a danger of colluding as a partner?
Oh, yeah, of course we have to be careful not to collude. Yeah, so what we're not saying in partnership is that we will let them off the hook. That's not what partnership is about. So because our role, our responsibility in a partnership is to ask them challenging questions. That is part of our responsibility. It is to hold the process, it's to hold the mirror up to them. And with that in mind, no, we're not going to collude. But if we end up working with somebody for longer than a year, let's say, I think there is then a danger that we might end up colluding, because we get to know each other so well that we may end up letting them off the hook. So my suggestion is, it's more a matter of how long you've been working together than this partnership. If you've been working together for some time, which I know happens more in internal coaching than it does in external coaching. I was an internal coach myself, and I know that I was guilty of this, but partly because I wanted to gain the hours of coaching to be able to get my credential. But actually what that ended up doing was meaning that yeah, perhaps there was that danger that I would collude with them and let them off the hook, because I knew them so well and I wasn't spotting things that seemed so obvious to me at the beginning. So I'd say it's more a matter of time than it is about partnering. Great question. Gosh, you're really making me think now too.
There's a few more questions. Are you happy to?
Yeah, please go for it.
Next one we've got down is, have you seen drawing being used effectively in online coaching?
Yes, I have. I do it all the time. I don't need to see their drawing. So I'm quite happy to invite them into drawing something. And in fact, I'm thinking of some group coaching I did last week, and I invited the group, you know, would it be useful to them to draw something that was representative of what they were working on? They said yes. They started drawing, and I didn't see any one of their pictures at all. And it didn't matter, because my questions were, what are you noticing about your picture? What's going on for you as you look at that picture? What's missing from that picture? So there's no content in those kinds of questions. It's more about them noticing stuff, them getting to deeper learning. Yeah, great question.
Next one, we've got a question about confidentiality. So what happens about confidentiality, and does the client know you are listening? So is it off-putting?
Okay. Yeah, so when you're in mental coaching and you bring a recording, yes, you have to have permission from the thinker to record the session. So that has to be written permission to bring that, and usually thinkers are happy with that, and as long as you give them the option at the end of the recording as well, in case something came up that they feel awkward sharing with others, and when I say others, I mean the mentor coach, and potentially if you're going for ICF credential, you need to submit recordings, so you'd need to get permission from the thinker for that as well. And what I suggest is that you record lots and lots of sessions so that you get over your performance anxiety and they get over their performance anxiety. Just make it run of the mill to record, and for you to just listen back to your coaching. The more you record, the less of that performance anxiety you'll have. You said about it being off-putting. Yeah.
Got, what do you need to be a coaching supervisor?
You should get some training. In a nutshell, I suggest you get some training. If anybody wants to know more about that, well, we've got Michelle Lucas here on the session, who's going to be running some sessions later today, so she'd be a good person to ask that to as well. Yeah. Anything else, Jess?
Got lots of great comments, and in response to some of the questions that you've been saying, I can't see any other particular questions. But,
okay. In that case, I shall ask you all to again get up from your desk and find 3 items in your room that represent or illustrate what your thinkers need from you that is different from what you have learned in life. So it could be things that represent what we've talked about today, or it could be something different, that this might have sparked something else for you. Oh yeah, my mum taught me blah, but I mustn't do that in coaching, for example. So go ahead, stand up, walk around, find 3 items that represent or illustrate what your thinkers need from you that's different from what you have learned in life. And I will ask you to share these in breakout rooms, but just go for whatever 3 items take your fancy. What you will have noticed today then is that we have used some of the things that we've been talking about to try to encourage you to see how these things can be used virtually. So somebody was asking about drawing. Perhaps we should have done drawing today as well. But you know, the idea is to use access different intelligences, different senses, to be able to help people to do their best thinking, as well as all these other things that we've talked about today. So as I said, many of these observations today came from the work that I do as a mentor coach, observing coaches when they coach and giving them feedback. So if you have any question, if you want to learn more about mentor coaching, there is a book, of course, Mentor Coaching, a Practical Guide, and I'll put the link into text chat in a moment. But also watch this space for this is the working title, Things We've Learned Through Life and Work That We Need to Unlearn as Coaches. So that's based on what we've talked about today and much, much more.